It started with what would Laura Roslin do? And now we're asking what would Sharon Raydor do? Welcome to the What Would Sharon Raydor Do podcast, where we talk with the woman who knows her best, Mary McDonnell, about all things Sharon Raydor, how she interacts with the team, her thoughts, processes, all that good stuff. I am here today with Mina from MajorCrimesTV.net.
Hey guys.
And will be our host today. And I am with the wonderful Mary McDonnell.
And who are you?
Oh, I'm Chelsea, by the way, guys. Hi. I guess we'll get started. There's a...
Yeah. Just a, I think, quick note before we start.
Oh,
that,
yeah.
If you haven't seen this week's double episodes of Major Crimes, stop now.
Yeah, just stop, guys.
Yeah,
come back
because
to
we're
this after
talking
you've
now.
listened, but we're gonna
go.
talk about
we're
everything.
going to go after this. So, really and truly, if you haven't seen it, you don't want to listen to this podcast yet.
Yeah. So we are diving right into the spoilers.
Yeah.
Yep.
So this is for episode 8 and 9 of season 6. Just
Okay.
getting that out there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here we go.
Okay. Now, I want to start out, everybody, because we sat here for a second in complete silence, the three of us, not quite ready to start this podcast. And then I was struck by Chelsea's introduction because there was Laura Roslin and Sharon Raydor, and now they're both gone. And then that was one thing that struck me. And the other thing was Chelsea stated very clearly that this is a podcast that involves a woman who knows Sharon Raydor best. And that's me. And that's part of what we're going to be talking about today, because I do feel like I know Sharon Raydor best. But I have noticed in the response to this very difficult ending that there's an awful lot of assumptions made out there on the part of many fans that are interpretations of Sharon Raydor that you have, which are completely valid. But I really, really ask all of you during the process, as we continue at the end of the show, to try to understand that not everyone is interpreting Sharon Raydor's ending the same way that you are. And I mean that both to the people who sent amazingly beautiful messages and positive things about it, and the people who are so enraged by it that both sides would acknowledge that there are other people who interpreted this story very differently, as I interpreted it differently than many of you, as I have learned over the last few days. I've never been in this position before, so please understand that I'm going to try and do this with as much respect and diplomacy as I can, but I am going to start out by saying that I still feel very devoted and, at this point, a little protective of the show. There are still 4 more episodes towards the end. I did not participate, obviously, in those episodes, but I have read them. I know what the content is, and I have to trust my own interpretation of the experience of the past year in terms of intention and ideas. Even though there's a lot of understandable resistance to the way that this happened. And I'm not going to argue any of that with any of you. You're perfectly right. It's perfectly within your right to feel however you feel. But nevertheless, I had an experience all year, and it was not a tragic one. And it was one where the ideas that were brought to me by James Duff, in order to deal with what we were all feeling, I was feeling it for a couple of years, which is that we were going to be ended. His sincere desire to end it on his terms as a writer was the driving force in the way this went. And when James says we did it together, what he is referring to is the fact that he did come to me and he did tell me what he was thinking, what he was planning on trying to do. He had a couple different scenarios depending on whether or not we were going to be canceled. I'm not the writer, as you all know, but I did feel in the process included, and it was up to me to figure out how to play what eventually became the end for Sharon as best as I could, and that is my job. So that's what I did, respectfully, with the rest of the cast, with the crew. This was difficult on everyone, you guys. I mean, I don't know. I read some of your comments yesterday, and I thought, did you think that we were all joyfully, gleefully killing Sharon Raydor and jumping up and down as to how that was going to land on the fans? And no. It was an artistic and dramatic choice made by a man who's been responsible for this franchise for 13 years. And whether or not any of us had issues with it in terms of what our own taste may or may not have been, we needed to play it as best we could. So I would just encourage people to take a breath for a minute and see if it might be worth it to stick with the show till the end. I do think that particularly the next episode may be of help if you're interested in it. If you're not, that's too bad, and I'm sorry that we as a collective created this much, I guess, rage or disenfranchisement might be the word. I'm not sure. But we were just laughing a second ago because we stopped, actually, because the phone was ringing. And I just had this feeling like I should answer the phone, which I didn't answer the phone. But in fact, it was Edward James almost calling. And I find that really interesting because here's the truth. Life goes on. I'm not going anywhere. Sharon Raydor will be there forever. This show will be there forever. Now, all that being said, I do want to address some of the issues that you have with the way that it ended, and because I think some of it's so freaking interesting. Because some of it is about women and where we are in the culture, and some of why you all love Sharon Raydor so much and why I loved her so much and why she grew for us was in reaction to what's happened in our politics over the last couple of years. And Sharon, to me, was a place where I could go where I felt like, well, at least there's somebody I know that just sort of still feels like she's in charge, because none of us do at times. Well, some of us do, clearly. But So I am kind of interested in a general sense about all of this. But I really did feel I had to mention those things at the top of this podcast because there's a lot of very vulnerable people right now who worked really hard on these last 4 episodes. Hundreds of people, including the crew. Teams of writers, actors, and they're hurting right now because they're experiencing how angry everybody is and the damning things that are being said to the show. And I feel terrible because it's my character's demise that is stimulating all of that. So I would just ask of you, if there's any part of you that feels like you can step back a little bit and take a breath and even give the rest of the series a chance, I really encourage you to do it. Because you'd be joining also millions of others who are not at this moment enraged. They're sad, but they're not enraged. All right, let's get off of that and see if we can address some of the specifics. Mina.
So I just want to let people know that I know Mary looked through a lot of stuff. I have been combing through your guys' comments. Chelsea has as well for 2 days now, just trying to get a sense of where people are, and also for the purposes of this podcast to be able to go into some of the issues that you guys really had some strong feelings about. So a lot of this is going to be what I've taken. I don't have individual questions from individual people because a lot of people had a very similar take on several things, and I wanted to try and address as much of that as possible. One thing that really stood out to me, and I think to Mary and everybody, is how much a lot of you and a lot of the viewers really, took a lot from Sharon Raydor and found her to be an inspiration. And I think some of the anger we've been feeling and the sadness really comes back to the fact that there's not always a lot of representation of strong women in media. There's not always a lot of representation of women, over a certain, that aren't 30 in media, and feeling like this ending for her was damaging to that. And I didn't know, Mary, if you wanted to speak to any of that.
I do. I didn't see this ending as damaging. I did see it, however, as shocking and deeply upsetting. When I read the scripts, even though I knew it was going to come, so I didn't have anywhere near the experience that you all had, because before I read how it happened, I knew before it was going to, because to their credit, the producers did not want me to be blindsided by any of this. And by the way, hello, that is unusual in Hollywood. So you got to give them that. Everybody, there could have been so many worse scenarios that I could be talking about right now and still be legally unable to talk about. So here right now, I've got nothing legal on me. There's no problem here. There's nothing. The group that I worked with just now for 10 years is thrilled that I'm doing this podcast. So back to your question, Mina, do I think that her ending is ultimately damaging to her image and her presence, I think, out there as a woman? I don't. I will tell you what I felt when I finally did read the last 2 episodes. I thought, my goodness sakes, this woman is staying, in my opinion, from the inside of interpreting her, is staying true to her nature right to the very end, which is that she was trying to put order to the life that she did not know how long it would last. And she was doing it as best as she could. Sharon Raydor had a stubborn streak, let's admit it. So I did not expect her to fall dead in the middle of nailing a criminal, nor did she. No one that I know who is a strong human being, when they're dealing with a major health issue, very few people don't inside of themselves feel like they're stronger than the issue. I mean, Sharon Raydor was not the kind of woman who was going to let this beat her in her sense of herself. So, and think about the emotional content of Sharon Raydor in those last couple of days. Think about the woman that she experienced on the heart transplant unit. And think about why then this woman, who is responsible for all these women's deaths, would make her mad. Sharon Raydor is a human being in her life and in her death. So for me to read all of these comments about, the interpretation of Sharon's actions towards the end of her life as suicidal or something like that really surprises me. Once again, you're free to interpret. This is art. This is not reality, and you are free to interpret it any way you want. But inside of me, I felt like Sharon was doing exactly what Sharon does. She was trying to take care of business and put things into order. On top of that, Sharon Raydor has a very strong religious practice. Her impulse to go and talk this through with the priest and ask for last rites made complete sense to me. By the way, you can have last rites as many times as you want to as a Catholic. If you are dealing with a potential fatal illness and you have fear, you can go and have last rites once a week if you want. The point is that you continue to practice spiritually the end of your life to prepare for a potential end of life situation. So I did not for 1 second think that Sharon Raydor was getting ready to kill herself. So when I heard these thoughts about that, I was a bit surprised. But all I can say to you all is that that was not the intention in the writing, and it was definitely not in my consciousness in the playing of it. I felt like this was a woman who stayed true to herself and stayed in charge of her own impulses, and then eventually life got her. But that is more the truth to me in terms of my experience of life out there and death out there than thinking that because a woman has been strong and ethical and true and moral, somehow she'll beat the odds. I mean, any of us could go at any point at any moment. So I kind of liked, did I like that she had to die? No. It's not my story. I don't write it. But there was something in the way she went about the process of taking care of business with people, having a hard time leaving the office. She just didn't want to stop. She didn't think she was stopping forever. She thought she's going to have to take some time off to do this, and maybe it would be forever. So she was taking care of everything. She didn't want to go. Of course she wanted to get at that woman. I mean, this is what she does. It didn't occur to Sharon that she was risking her life in that moment because it didn't feel like it was. You know, I mean, this is the thing. I'm not quite clear about all of that response. But anyway, back to Mina's question. Do I think it's damaging? No, I do not. I think that life is a lot bigger than we are, and the only thing that really counts once we're gone is how we lived it. And if Sharon Raydor's Achilles' heel was her own righteous indignation at people who kill other people, and that's what killed her, I'll take it. And I'll live it, and I'll let it be her legacy, because many people, well, not many, but I saw a few people wanted to see her die, killing Stroh. Oh, yeah, so let's let her legacy be another woman out there with a gun in her hand. You know what? I'm sorry, people. I'm not there with that. There's other ways that human beings are powerful. And she was an extremely powerful human being. But none of us are more powerful than our own death. And I think that's part of the point here. And this show was ending anyway. So would I have preferred to walk out hand in hand of the murder room with Andy Flynn and go quietly into retirement as Sharon Raydor? No. It's as honest as I can be with you. I would not have preferred that. So I guess you're kind of hearing a little bit of my feelings about all of this. And I hope that you're big enough to hear that my anger is a little flared as well. Okay, let's do another question.
You just hit about 6 of mine all at once.
I know. I don't know how to not do that, Mina.
I prepare and then you just
I know.
blow it right out of the water.
Who knows where I'm going?
Hold for shuffling of paper.
Yeah. I guess one thing, and I don't want to beat this too much, but I guess one thing that I found that people kept coming back to is, is some frustration because Sharon spent this season being happy, and we saw her, she basically came out and said it, last week. She, had met the love of her life. She'd gotten this promotion to commander that she had stopped expecting. She was so excited for Rusty, and it, granted, life is cruel. But there was a part of this that felt, I don't know. it felt cruel in a way to have her end in this way. And, at what point, I guess the question is, do you feel that art or TV or anything like that is a little bit more supposed to show an idealized part of life, where maybe this kind of cruel ending doesn't befall a character like that, versus reflecting what life is, and that, like you said, anyone can die at any moment and it doesn't have to be fair?
I don't think art's obligation is to make people feel better about how difficult life is. I really don't think. And if television uses itself that way, to me it gets a little bit scary. But I've always been that way. My feeling as an actress, and the projects that have meant a lot to me have not been easy for people. And I've always taken it for granted that the most powerful things we experience involve pain. I've always felt that way in life. And that out of being able to experience that kind of pain, we can experience great amount of joy. So to me, art's always been, on some level, an instrument of pain, of releasing pain. And so maybe I'm a little odd that way. Honestly, I will admit it, and I hope this isn't further making people angry, because I don't like anger in myself, and I feel bad for it in other people. That's not going to get us anywhere. But I do think that touching our pain, I think television particularly is there for us to touch the pain that's in us already when the painful moments happen. So we get very upset when a character dies from a natural cause because we weren't prepared for and it doesn't measure up. But we can watch again and again and again people killing people without any response to that. I would rather be in the camp that provided a story that offered people a chance to fall apart, because there's a lot to fall apart about in life. Life is not logically set up for us to win. It is not. Life is an experience of overcoming pain, overcoming difficulty, and grief. Okay, let's just talk about grief, because that's what all this is about, right? So I went to a funeral yesterday, ironically, the night after Sharon died. I had to go to a funeral of a beautiful woman that was a dear, dear, dear person to a very dear friend of mine. And it was in a Catholic church. And the priest talked very eloquently. It was a huge, huge family. Everyone was there. And he talked very eloquently about grief. And he encouraged everybody in the room to not back away from grief, and to not try to fill it with anger, and to not try to fill it with attack and blame. And he was so eloquent, and I was stunned by it, because I felt like, oh my gosh, I wish I could just tape his speech and then we could all talk about it on the podcast, because it was so healing for me, and I felt so bad for all the fans. It was like, oh my God, look at what grief really means. And then he said the greatest thing of all, which is for you all fans. He said, the amount of grief you feel is directly equivalent to the amount of love you held for the person that's gone. And the more you love, the harder it is. So this really sucks, to quote most of you. It's really, really hard. I get that. I want to talk a little bit about what I went through from the time I actually finished until now, when I could talk about it, because many of you, Mina, I think, weren't there some questions about that? Or
I think we all want to know how you're doing, and you've been through this first before all of us, and you were the closest to her. So what was the experience like, going into this, and how have you been processing, that grief of losing this character which you inhabited for so long?
Right. Well, I'll start with the not so subtle experience with TNT. After Michael Wright left TNT and Kevin Riley came in, there was a new agenda. And I say this absolutely practically speaking, that Kevin Riley made it very clear to us that his idea for the network didn't necessarily involve the world of major crimes. So knowing that right from the get-go, or what was our season 2 or season 3, something like that, you could feel that, we're skating on thin ice here. So we've been working with that energy for years, and that is very difficult. I don't think people really get how hard that was for James Duff to be able to continue to fully do this and keep trying to risk new things without major support from a network, which Michael Wright gave the closer Major Crimes in spades. There was just a different point of view. So here's a show that's doing very well, as you all know, out there in the world, and the numbers are crazy, and it's big, and it's a hit, without any talk about it from the network. At the upfronts, we're kind of ignored. There's no campaigns for Emmys. There's no energy being put into the show. That is a very hard thing. So you're already feeling a little bit like you're dying. Slowly. Slow leak. Felt like a slow gas leak, And yet it didn't feel that way on the set because of the writers and the actors and the crew. People kept going at it like we were a hit, because of the fans. So when James and Mike sat me down and we talked through this, that the dilemma was this for the show creator. I know in my gut that we are going to be canceled between season 6 and season 7. Season 6 is when the actors, in particular the lead actress's contract is up and renegotiations would have begun as we were moving through, and they were not happening. My contract was up. We were not going to be talking about it. And that was very clear. So let me get back on track. What was the point of this? Does anybody remember? I dove into another thing that I wanted to talk about.
Talking about your experience with this.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay, I'm back. Sorry, you guys. This is just all too much, as you well know. I'm kind of like you are. I'm a bit of a basket case. So the lead up to, okay, if the show is going to continue, this is going to be the storyline. If the show isn't going to continue, this may be the storyline. This is what we're playing with. So already I'm going, okay, I am absolutely 100% sure the show is going to be canceled. And I tried to keep a lot of that to myself because you don't want to spread negativity, but it was pretty clear to me. So I evaluated all of that against that instinct that I had and the business that I could see that was not taking place. And so in my mind, it was, yes, okay, we got to move on. Then the idea of having something big to act was very appealing to me, big and emotional to act, still not knowing what it was, And then knowing that it was going to probably be that. And then when I read it, I felt, like I stated before, as difficult as this is, there's honor in this passing. And I would rather go out as a woman who if she killed herself, it was due to righteousness and her insane inability to allow a murderess of this level to get away without hearing from her. But none of that's rational. Do you see what I'm saying? I thought, when I read that, wow, what an amazingly ironic ending to a woman whose ideas about justice were at the core of her soul to begin with. And I was quite pleased that she wasn't going out taking a bullet from Stroh as she shot him dead or something like that, jumping in front of a bullet to save Rusty. I'm just so tired of bullets. But, whatever. But then when I had to shoot it, it was really, really, really hard. It was hard for me. It was hard for the cast. It was hard for the crew. It was really hard for the crew. And the premature ending of it all was hard on everybody. Then I had to just kind of like keep my mouth shut. What was one of the difficult things for me during this time was the campaign to save major crimes and watching that evolve and not being able to say, you guys just know, though, that if major crimes continues, which it perhaps might have, it looks like it won't, but it perhaps might have on a different thing. But the idea that it would be not major crimes, it would be something else because there would be no Sharon Raydor. But I couldn't say any of that because out of, legal reasons, et cetera, nor, would I want to, due to my own needs, spoil the show, which is not my show. It's not my creation. So there was not even one part of me who wanted to, do any of that. But it was difficult to sort of navigate wishing that we could clarify it sooner. That was the truth. I just really wished we could have clarified all of this sooner for everybody's sake.
Which we, did as much. We tried to in the podcast when we talked about the cancellation. There were definitely, but within the constraints that were there.
Yeah.
But certainly, I think keeping this from the fans, watching as everyone was so excited for the season and experience the wedding was very difficult, knowing what the ultimate outcome was going to be.
Right. Let's talk about some of the women things, like the general ideas about women. I want to get off the show per se. We'll be talking about that for a long time. And I just want to say this final thing to you all. I know I was kind of upset at the beginning of the podcast because it is upsetting to feel all of the anger. It is just an upsetting experience. Once again, I don't judge the anger, but I felt like I did have to defend the show because I do really sincerely think it would be unfair to the rest of the show as they had to keep going without Sharon Raydor. Those actors, Tony Dennison, some of these people I was very close to, and they had to keep going and do it, and they did it 100%. And it was not necessarily comfortable for them, but the product is going to be wonderful, and I just want to support that.
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely. So, going back to the issue of women in media, I think you and I have talked at the beginning about other shows where the female tends to be the expendable one.
Yeah, I know.
The lead female, or the woman falls, and then the man at the end of the movie or the TV show or whatever, the men are there to pick up the pieces, but the woman is the one who has gone, and it's hard, to see, in the case of Sharon, it's hard to see it just for Sharon, but it's also hard to not see it as part of a bigger issue in media itself.
Yeah,
of the expendable woman.
I think that's a really interesting question, and I don't know really what I think. I've never discussed this with James, like as a theoretical thing or a sociological thing. So I can't really I don't want to speak about it completely in relation to Sharon Raydor, because my experience was that was not how James thought about it. 100% was not. But I do understand it as a thematic. I've seen it. Well, I've seen it. I just realized how funny that is. I've done it 4 times. And, I have to admit, I had to go to therapy and say, okay, why am I always getting killed? And my therapist was brilliant. He just made me turn my head around and said, oh, man, hold on a second. My phone is ringing again. Let's see if it's anything I need to really pay attention to. The call is from Missouri, and no offense to any of you fans who are living in Missouri, but I don't know a soul in Missouri, so I'm assuming I don't have to answer that call. I would love to be someday in the great state of Missouri. Anyway, so let's get back to this. Women. So on the show Ray Donovan, I just watched Paula Malcolmson's incredible performance, dying of cancer, at which Paula's character actually did choose to end her life out of pain and suffering. And I had the same thought. My thoughts went like this. That was a brilliant performance. She's an extraordinary woman of a certain age, although she's a lot younger, but it seems to be getting younger. I wonder if her contract was up. I wonder if this, you know what I mean? Like, you go through all of that. And then I did reflect on, because I knew Sharon Raydor was going to pass when I was watching Paula's amazing performance. And I thought, why are we losing these women? Why are we losing these women? And yet, it didn't really make me reflect on James, because I know how he was thinking. But maybe there's a bigger thing, you know what I mean, that we're all trying to figure out on the planet about the feminine. I mean, why isn't Hillary president? Why did the Russians jump in? What is it we're trying to hold back here? You know what I mean? These are the kind of questions that come up for me. And I don't think that it's conscious in a lot of the effort to hold women back or bring them down or keep them withheld or whatever. But I do think it's real. And I do acknowledge some of the questions about that would come up in the loss of Sharon. That here's a woman who is finally happy and had sort of brought to closure so many issues that were in her way of happiness. She had a job that she loved. She had a really good husband. She dared to love again. She dared to get married again and get over her own fears. She now had a full family of educated children. That was very important to her. So what are we saying, you know? So you get everything you need and then you die, right? That's kind of a terrible, terrible thought. But it is a reality at times. And do we want to continue to say that? Because how does that keep inspiring people? How do all these women that are inspired by Sharon Raydor then continue to be inspired by her if that's the end? If that's it? And that's a really good question. I struggle with that question with things in my life all the time. Because you think you want to keep going 100%. You want to keep committing. You want to keep creating. You want to keep risking. You want to keep loving. But constantly life takes it away. And you have to do it despite the zero, what's that thing called? Zero sum.
Zero
what
sum
is it?
game.
Yeah. There's this giant zero sum game in death. Right? And so it's like, it does bring up big questions. Do we not tell the same stories about men? I don't know. Maybe not. They get to be more heroic, perhaps. They get to live longer. They don't get killed off as much. Is that true? I don't know.
I mean, I haven't seen, you know, in looking through all this, it has been something that I'm now very interested in to see if anyone has researched the number thing. But I think, you know, we tend to, in TV and movies, see, you know, there'll be a couple women and a bunch of men. And so I think maybe the ratio's off to start with. And then so one woman being removed from a piece feels like a bigger impact.
That's
because
a really good point, Mina.
There's only one of them versus, you know, 7 dudes.
Yeah. See, this is where I feel a big loss of Sharon Raydor. You just actually touched on something, Mina, which I wanted to talk about. And it kind of goes back to an original question where she was such an inspiration. So does this change that? Like, how does this hurt that? The way that I think Sharon Raydor being gone, but it also has to do with the fact that she doesn't have a show anymore to be on. So it's not just Sharon leaving. It's that Sharon's leaving is part of the show no longer being there for a character like Sharon Raydor to exist. And that goes back to the lack of interest from the network, which you can say is a lack of interest culturally on some level, given the environment that we're in right now, right? And that is scary because, now is it scary really? Is that the word I mean? No, that is the challenge, because you want to see women in their 60s at the peak of their lives who have decades ahead of them that they can create great stuff in the world. You want to see that over and over and over again so we get used to it as a paradigm, as a reality. And what just happened with her was that the opposite occurred. And so in a broader sense, like a sociological sense, I think it is a challenge to figure out, how do we get Sharon Raydor back on the air, or someone like her, or a lot of women like her? How are we going to get these women to thrive out there?
Which has been, I think, a big issue the last several years in
Yes.
the Hollywood industry, is why are women's stories not being told? And, it takes one movie, with a female lead does well, and if that movie had been with a male lead, they would make 7 more just like it. But they look at the one with a female and go like, well, like those, I don't know, like the Amy Poehler movies or whatever.
Yeah.
They're like, well, it's just a fluke. It did well. We're not going to make any more of those.
This is something I'm going to share with you all that I've not shared with anyone. But there was a moment when I was with someone in the music industry having a meeting. And this person was giving an overlay of the music industry and saying, well, if you look at someone like Adele, that's an aberration because she's so old. And I thought to myself, and I love Adele, and I think she's a miracle. And so, and I want more of her out there. We need her. We need her. There's so many potential feminine, strong, interesting, idiosyncratic voices that we need to hear again and again. And so, but the attitude is, but that's a fluke. I mean, she's just her, because she needs to be 19 to succeed right now. She needs to be 20. You know what I'm saying? In general. So I think that is true. I think we're in a fight. On some level, we're in a fight for our lives. And I think that I feel really grateful that Sharon Raydor had the run that she did through these political times. Think about that.
I mean, it's been 9
What if she hadn't been there during this whole Hillary thing?
It would have been
You
nothing.
know what I mean? It would have been a bummer for a lot of really brilliant young women and a lot of politically motivated women bouncing off of Sharon Raydor and the Major Crimes team, and the world of ethics that Major Crimes brought to the table is so invisible on television. And so the visibility of people who were human beings who really actually were devoted to saving people's lives and getting bad guys in a way without having to be dysfunctional people going after bad guys. That, to me, if there's a legacy in Major Crimes, that is it for me. It is that this was a group of highly moral, ethical characters. Idiosyncratic cuckoo. I mean, where are you going to meet a Provenza with that hat? It was priceless. His struggles, his cranky struggles. But there was never a moment where I doubted the bottom line ethics of the characters on Major Crimes. And I'm looking for that.
Right.
I'm looking for it. But it sort of feels like I'm not sure that that's what we're into these days.
Right. I think that's why we are getting the reaction we are.
Maybe.
Why Sharon's being mourned, why this has brought out a very different brand of, I think, grief in a lot of people, is because we don't have this anywhere else. This was a very singular show and a very unique character on a very singular show. And that combined, made losing this not like, oh, well, I got that other show I watched that I really like.
Yeah.
But that it's something bigger than
Right.
it is.
Yeah, well, what I'm thinking as I'm listening to you, Mina, and I'm reflecting on what all these gals, men and women, are saying out there, and the loss of her, the loss of the show, is, well, maybe it's a kind of a, I don't want to say a wake-up call, because I really feel like our fans are woke. These are a group of woke people, and that's part of what I love about it. It's like these people don't sleep at all. They're like such big thinkers.
Right.
So maybe the spirit of all of this is up to us to keep alive in whatever form we can, because we couldn't keep the show going. They canceled us. Let's remember that. It's not, there's a power, a hierarchy of power. And it was up to TNT to keep this ball rolling. That's all in there. They didn't want to. Entirely their prerogative. But leaves us with the dilemma of how do we keep that spirit of ethics and when I say a safe place to be once a week, I don't mean it in a sentimental sense. I don't mean it in a Hallmark sense, even though, believe me, there's nothing better than a good Hallmark movie on a rainy Wednesday
Christmas
night.
Hallmark movies?
Christmas
Oh
Hallmark.
my gosh, you guys.
God, I know.
All of them.
I know. But I don't mean it that way. I just mean safe in terms of us understanding who we are in the world and understanding, okay, there is an ethical code. There is a moral code that we can live by, and there's a logic to that. And if you treat people well, you're treated well, and all of those things, and you can figure out where the evil is, and you can stop it. That's what was safe about it to me, and that's what we're missing, and that's what we have to figure out, how to keep going. And what will be the next show that will take that place? What will be the next network that will want that to be the hallmark of their, Hallmark.
Exactly.
I'm really on that. It's all the Christmas cards and everything. What will be the network? Who will be the network that wants to promote that kind of energy at the core? Because certainly Michael Wright and Steve Koonin did with TNT. That's what they wanted. And this is a different, this is a different network.
And I would hope that, as you said, it's a different experience to go through this when we do have this instant feedback from fans. And, we're getting these comments and, that's new. But that also means that studio heads and creators are out there and can see things like this. And so I would hope that reactions like what we're seeing, obviously it hits everybody different, but maybe that gets to the one person who's out there, trying to sell a show or see that there's this kind of reaction to a show with this kind of moral center.
Yeah, that's
and
a good
decides
point.
that maybe there's something else there.
Maybe that's right. That's a good point. And it's a very interesting time. I think Sharon became more important over the last couple of years for several reasons. She was important anyway, partially because of the way fans interpreted her. You know what I mean? And needed her. And so she grew, right? What's that Hillary Clinton thing? And so she proceeded. What's that?
Nevertheless, she persisted.
Nevertheless, she persisted. So there's that part of it. But I also think Sharon became more important recently, certainly to me. Very emotionally so. As I have been watching the kind of cancer in the misogyny of Hollywood become exposed and watching fellow actresses have to work their way through, opening up their stories to the public, has been one of the most extraordinary things the most extraordinary thing I've experienced in my career as an actress, because the courage that it has taken for these women and men to come forward and open up that humiliation to the public for scrutiny, and then to stand by each other as they are vilified by people who want none of it, and to continue to persist as more and more men are being called on this. And the issue of dominance and inappropriate use of power is so available to us. Sharon became even more valued in my mind. It's like Sharon would start a commission on this. You know what I mean? Like Sharon Raydor would have, like, if this got to her desk, what is happening, you know, it would have become a whole.
Also, I think Sharon experienced likely a lot of this and came out on the other side of it.
Yep.
And that's inspirational to people who might be experiencing that or have experienced that.
Well, you know what? The people out there who were looking to Sharon for that don't really have to continue to, I mean, you can still hold her there. But there's not a woman in the workplace today who's been out there for longer than a minute. Well, no, there are some, because I've met them at all these Christmas parties, and I end up in arguments with them. But I'm not kidding you. They're defending, you know, the men, because partially they've not experienced it. Look, there are women who have not experienced this, but I am absolutely committed to the subtler versions of this extraordinary nightmare that we're hearing about are so embedded in our culture that diminishment isn't even recognized as such by a lot of women and men. Diminishment is at the core of the competitive, like Sharon, then one of my favorite lines that she said was, something, yes, compete. What was it? Compete, yes, something, no. What was that? Look I can't even quote myself. I'm sorry. I never could. We're going to get to this, though, because a couple people quoted it over and over on Twitter. She was talking about the heart transplant dilemma, which I thought was vintage Sharon. She said, this is a woman I would take a bullet for on the street, but in the heart transplant unit, I'd be competing with her for, you know, life, for her future as a mother, and I think that really struck me as the essence of part of what I'm talking about right here, is that Sharon, fighting for one's life is, of course, what one must do every day. But competing against others for life lived is embedded in our culture, and there is something in there that I'm not comfortable with, me personally, that there is a killer competitive instinct in Western capitalism, let's say, and we're so used to it that we don't even think about it. Maybe this is my years of somewhat practicing Buddhism coming into play, but I don't feel that life in its essence is a one pitted against the other experience, but we are trained to think of it that way. And so, taking that back to women, the diminishment of the other, whether it's a man or a woman, is part of that psychology. I'm going to win at all costs here. And how do I win, and how do I keep myself on top? Partially, because it's all egoic anyway, is that I feed my ego by re-experiencing my domination over others. And that is so in our culture, in our capitalistic Western culture. It's in like the molecules. So when I hear my fellow women say, I've never experienced any of that, I get a little cuckoo. I'm ready to flip my lid a little bit, because it's like, yes, you have. You just don't know that you have. And so have many men experienced it. It's not about, it isn't completely a gender issue. It is primarily a gender issue, or it is an issue of dominance over the feminine in all of us. The feminine, which is receptive, perhaps not as set up as an energy force to dominate, which I find a sophisticated, powerful thought, which is why I didn't need Sharon Raydor to go out with a pistol in her hand. To me, that's the cliche. Forgive me. So, I don't know where I'm going now. Let's move on. I got a little lost.
Hey guys, Chelsea back here.
Huh?
Okay, so to get us
Chelsea
unlost,
didn't go anywhere. Just to qualify that, to explain it, she's back, but she never left. So
I'm still here. I just wanted you guys to have room to talk. You did a Variety article that got published or an interview that got published
by
on
the
Tuesday.
great Mo Ryan. Can we
yeah.
just give her a little, we love Mo.
And you spoke about kind of you, Mary, as an actress processing the death of Raydor.
Yeah.
And one of the things I read in that interview, you spoke about how it was really a process of letting Sharon finally relax and letting pieces of yourself that maybe weren't useful to Sharon kind of come back. And I was just wondering if you would be able to speak to that and kind of talk about your process and all that awesome stuff.
Sharon Raydor, when I first started to experience her, had a far more economical personal and emotional energy than I do as a human being. I'm far more mercurial and impulsive. And I get myself into hot water a lot because I just blurt. I'm not as carefully thought through as Sharon Raydor. I try, and she taught me a lot about that, but I'm not. So as Sharon was leaving me, I felt sad to see her go. But I also felt liberated a bit in that when you play a character for years, their primary energy that you've committed to in yourself does have a tendency to take over. Do you know what I'm saying? And I'm a lot more, my dad used to call me the little imp because I was always stirring, and I like fun, and I like getting into trouble. Do you know what I mean? I'm a lot more childlike than Sharon was able to be. Thank God, because there's no way I would have ever been able to accomplish something that Sharon pulled off. So when you start to feel those two things happening in you, it's such an amazing process to witness. And then you start to think, actors are totally fracking out of their minds. Here we are in the process of mourning a person who never existed, who lives inside of our own selves anyway, while the other parts of it's what? Get out the beanbag gun. It's just so insane that the product we create is out of our own emotional and psychological energy, and then gets tweaked, and then it gets untweaked, and then something else occurs. So that's kind of what I was experiencing I've been doing this for a long, long time, but this one was more vivid to me as a process, and partially because it was so shocking, the ending. Whereas with Laura Roslin, for example, I knew from the very first meeting before I ever took the job that she was going to die in the last episode. So the whole arc was played with that in mind. And so there was no shock at all. You know what I mean? And so she was dying in me while she was dying in her. That woman was dying the whole time. That was a completely different experience for me. But watching Sharon leave. But there are parts of her I'm keeping. Because she's really good at stuff, and I want to be that good. And Sharon has pushed me forward into the culture more in a way that I haven't been. This podcast has helped me define my ideas and put them out there. And the podcast, came out of Sharon and then came out of you, Chelsea, and then you, Mina, and your collective energy of saying, let's get in the mix with all these remarkable fans and their ideas, and let's use this opportunity. So, I think we should end it now because really we could go on for hours. And I think that this whole process with the end of Major Crimes needs time to happen. And that we'll have a lot of conversations about this. And once the show is ended, there'll be interesting conversations reflecting back to Sharon's position and her death inside that end. And it will look differently. And all of the comments will still be interesting, even if they're still upset. Do you know what I mean? Because the one thing I will say that I really deeply appreciated over the last couple of days, well, I'll say a couple things and we'll stop. One is that I was reminded again just how interesting the collective minds are out there that watch this show. The deepness of some of the thought. And yeah, a lot of it was emotional reaction to trauma, for sure. But even in that, there was a lot of really interesting stuff articulated, and I really love that. But the other thing is, I do want to finally close out with a shout out to this cast and the show, and James and Mike and the writers and all the directors that we have loved all of these years and everything. They're still airing this show, and they're still waiting to give it to you. So I know there are millions of you who are definitely going to watch. But to those who feel like they're in too much pain to continue with the show, I really encourage you to I'm going to take a risk here. Take my word for it. I'm not going to say I'm going to be right, but give it a chance. Because there is potential in that for you to come out with a different feeling. And I'm not trying to change your ideas. I'm just suggesting that. I feel very supportive of James and Major Crimes and its ending. And I really feel it deserves participation. So if you can do it, please do it. And those of you who already want to, I'm thrilled for you. And I guess that's all I have to say for now.
I think we'll probably
be back here. What do you
girls
want to say?
I just that, I very much appreciate the fans' reactions. And I think it, in the way that I've been involved with the show, it is gratifying to see other people be so involved and think so deeply about it. To know that there's that level of it, and that's shared by a lot of people. And a lot of really intelligent people, and a lot of people who spoke very eloquently and very, it's not just, well, that sucked, but it's a lot of people who are expressing very deep opinions and things that are really interesting.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us are going to be thinking about a lot of it for a long time.
Yeah, that's great, Mina.
Yeah.
Thank you for everything you've done so far. I mean, it's just been your contribution, MajorCrimesTV.net, was extraordinary. I mean, there was a period of time where we would not have known at all what was happening out in the world and in terms of the show and its numbers and everything had you not done that. And I know how much you were appreciated by James and Major Crimes and the whole group.
In case you guys didn't know, Mina's kind of a rock star.
Yeah, and Miss Chelsea, who encouraged this podcast to begin with.
Yay.
That is really, there's something about the way you went after that I will never forget. And I'm not saying we're ending it.
No.
I'm just saying.
No. We'll be back.
We're going to transform it. We don't know into what yet.
Yeah.
But
so don't ask us what's next because we
we're
don't
not
know.
sure if it's going to always be What Would Sharon Raydor Do, which it might be forever. I'm sure they would be more than happy to let us keep that name, meaning, Major Crimes, James Duff, whatever, because everybody is in support of this podcast, by the way. Yeah. I don't know what TNT thinks of it because they don't speak to me about it. But so we don't know yet in what form this will proceed, but we do know that we don't want to end this relationship because we find it really gratifying. And I would feel like a little bit of a hole in me if I wasn't continuing with the podcast.
Yeah, I think it's I think we've managed to tap on something really important that we've all found something there, and I think there's more to expand upon. I know fans have been, throwing out a lot of suggestions and things, and I think we all, I'm sure we'll all talk and find a way. And same with Major Crimes TV. I'd like to find a way for it to, like this podcast, to grow to something bigger that is an homage to what, to the show and to the character,
show was,
but also find a way for it to exist in a post Major Crimes world.
Wow.
So
that's a big statement. It really is a post Major Crimes world.
Yeah.
That is sort of the culture we are in. That is, and there's a legacy to even be able to say that about a show, that it made such an impact that there's a post is really cool. Something to be deeply proud of.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, so until next time.
Oh, wait, before we go.
Yes.
I have some final announcements.
Yes.
Thank you guys so much for listening and sticking with us. And we hope this episode has helped to bring some closure and give you some insight and all of that good stuff. If you like us, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, 5 stars. We would love it. So you can find us there. You can also now find us on Stitcher for all of you Android users. So that's very exciting. So make sure you share, comment. We love reading your comments.
We do.
This last time was
great.
It was really hard to wade through everything, but we're so thankful that you guys are so not just invested in the show Major Crimes, but also have become invested in us, because I don't think I've ever worked on something where I feel this connected to the people that are just out there in the ether tweeting at us. So thank you guys so much for being connected with us. This is our last podcast of 2017. Which is
oh my gosh.
Crazy.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing. Yeah.
So yeah, leave us a review. We love you guys.
We do.
Happy holidays.
Happy
holidays. Happy New Year, all that good stuff. Mary, do you want to have your sign off?
I do. So this podcast has been brought to you in part by MajorCrimesTV.net. Merry Christmas.